dancing in the back. We'll all get together here. So good afternoon. Welcome to the first meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Unarmed Crisis Prevention, Intervention, and Community Service. Today is Friday, March 28th. I'm Councilmember Bob Blumenfield, and I am joined by my co-chair, Councilwoman Hernandez, who I am really excited to be working closely together with to bring our shared vision of deploying the right resource to respond to emergency dispatch. We're also joined by Council Members Lee and Price, and you know, this is a new thing for the city to have a committee, an ad hoc committee that is co-chaired. But I can't think of a better committee to do this on, and a better person to co-chair it with, because we are in lockstep in our vision of really trying to make this into a reality. So before we get started, Ms. Hernandez, would you like to say some opening remarks?
Yes, thank you, Council Member. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you to everyone who is joining us for the first meeting of the new Ad Hoc Committee on Unarmed Crisis Prevention, Intervention, and Community Services. This is an important day for LA, a day that's been a long time coming. This committee is personal to me. I spent my career advocating for alternatives to incarceration, for care first policies that prevent harm and violence instead of just reacting to it, and for people who've been over policed and criminalized, and really trying to build out what they really need, which is help. I want to acknowledge and thank my co-chair, Councilmember Blumenfield, who has been a long-time advocate for expanding unarmed crisis response at the city, and I'm looking forward to working together on this committee to bring this to a capacity that serves everyone in the city. 2 years ago, I brought a delegation from Denver's STAR program to council chambers to share an innovative model for alternative crisis response to demonstrate how a municipality can successfully scale up an unarmed crisis response model. They launched their program serving 9% of their city, and they successfully scaled to their entire city over the course of just 1 year. I raise this because I hope that we can bring that same sense of urgency and innovation to Los Angeles, so we can be more nimble and responsive to the unique needs in our city. We know we have a shared vision for building out unarmed alternatives to crisis response, and we've already made important moves to invest in those life-saving programs. Together, I'm confident that we can go beyond pilots and create a 21st century model that meets the moment that we're in. When someone is in crises, they deserve to be met with care. We know this model works. In just 1 year, the City of Los Angeles' unarmed model of crisis response has diverted over 6,000 calls, with 96% resolved without police and at a fraction of the cost. That's thousands of Angelenos who were met with support instead of force. And at a time when we're confronting a $1 billion budgetary shortfall, deploying unarmed crisis responders to calls that can be diverted isn't just the right thing to do, it's also fiscally responsible. And we owe it to Los Angeles to keep fighting until care is the first response, not the last resort. Thank you, Councilmember Blumenfield. I'm really excited about working with you on this. Let's get together, let's do some work, and thank you, colleagues, for joining us as well.
All right. So let's officially get started. If we can call the roll, Ms. Ramirez, would you call the roll to get?
Aye. Oh. Councilmember Blumenfield.
Present.
Councilmember Hernandez.
Present.
Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Rahman. Councilmember Price. We have 3 present.
Great. So thank you, members. Today we have 2 discussion items on the agenda. We're now ready to receive comments from the general public. This is a special meeting, so there will be no general public comment. Each speaker will have 1 minute per agenda item. So if you have a total of 2 minutes, if you should choose to speak on both items. With that, would the speakers come to the podium, or we have the list? We want to read the names?
Yes. May we please have Dan, Michelle Porter, Bart Reed, Brendan Fisher, Christy Lamberston, Garza, and Danielle Williams.
Great. And you don't have to be in the exact order that you were called, but just go ahead and line up on the left side, house left, stage right. And we'll start with Mr. Gus.
Yeah,
Welcome.
good afternoon. DanielGus.substack.com. A year ago, I was the Los Angeles Press Club Online Journalist of the Year. And I also won an LA Press Club award called Does 99% of LA Have Any Remaining Rights? And I want to point out, if you took it so seriously, how come 40% of the council members on this committee are missing? If it's so good, and your first meeting, 40% of you are missing. You have no supporting documents in the digital agenda. I know some folks here have talking points, and that's fine. If you wanted the public to understand what these models were about, where is there one freaking page of description of these models? How do you expect to get good public feedback on either of these two models if you don't have one word written about it on the council page? So spare me the, oh, it's great, oh, it's Denver, oh, it's scientific, oh, it's fiscally responsible. You don't even have a description in your inaugural meeting where you're missing 40% of the council members. What happened to urban alchemy? Because I've called 311 and 911 when there was a guy who could barely stand in an SUV at the corner of Sepulveda and Victory by Lido Pizza. You can't get a response, and here's the problem. Urban alchemy and whoever you've replaced it with was politically connected. So right off the bat, shoot yourself in the foot, shoot yourself in the foot, shoot yourself in the foot, because historically these efforts have been politically tied and no documents. And 40% of you, by the way, John Lee was here this morning. Where's John Lee now if this is such a big deal? He was here. I don't know if Nithya was here, but he was here. So as the first speaker of your inaugural meeting, great skepticism, not even a word that I can read about this. So I guess I'll read about it later when you have something posted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Christy Lambertson. I live in Venice in Council District 11, and I'm here to support LA Forward Institute's advocacy around the unarmed model of crisis response, in particular to ensure that it is funded through the 25-26 budget cycle at a minimum of $12 million. I hope that you will back up your spoken commitment to this program with actual dollars. UMCR saves lives. It means that calls that might typically go to armed police are diverted to better trained responders for mental health, substance abuse calls, and more, which includes behavioral health specialists, community workers, a therapist, a crisis interventionist that serve both housed and unhoused neighbors, which I think is important that it's available to everybody. In its first year of operation, UMCR was able to reach incidents with an average response time of 28 minutes. And it was able to also reduce the county DMH services, which before UMCR had a 6-hour response time, and they've now decreased down to 2 hours. So if we close UMCR, it worsens the response rate for everyone, as these calls would go back to either the police department, fire department, or a county DMH, slowing everyone's response times overall. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Danielle Williams. I live in Beverly Grove in CD5, and I'm here also to speak on item 2. I'm also with LA Ford's Institute and supporting their advocacy around the UMCR pilot, specifically to highlight the need to continue its funding. We keep on hearing it's a bad year for the budget. We understand. But as Councilmember Hernandez pointed out, this is a common sense proposal. So we're asking for a minimum of $12 million to continue the pilot program. We see it as a part of the city's long-term commitment to establish a 24/7 comprehensive citywide unarmed crisis response program. UMCR is the right combination of what we need. Of all the city and council programs, UMCR is the only one that checks all of these boxes. It's 100% unarmed. It utilizes trained clinicians. It does not commit individuals on involuntary 5150 holds, which we know prevents people from seeking care. It works with both housed and unhoused individuals and has a response time of less than 30 minutes on average. Why would we cut UMCR when it is? Please support UMCR.
Thank you. Next speaker. Let us know which item or items you're speaking on.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Michelle Porter. I am speaking on item 2. I am a proud resident of CD4 and a lifelong Angelino, second generation actually. I'm here to speak on CD2 about why we need unarmed crisis response. I'm a cab driver in LA and I see a lot of stuff, people that need help, but as a person that was justice impacted, I'm very scared to call 911 because I don't want that person that I see the next morning I'm seeing them on the news because they were shot and killed. We need something like this, especially considering that in 2026 we have the World Cup coming, and also in 2028 we have the Olympics. So we need something that is moving forward, that protects our citizens, and keeps everybody safe. So again, let's ensure that the 25-26 budget includes funding for UCMR for a measly amount of $12 million to extend it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Brendan Fisher. I'm coming from downtown LA, represented by CD14. And I'm also here to speak on item 2, more specifically about LA Ford's advocacy on behalf of the unarmed models of crisis response, and more specifically, looking forward to the upcoming budget cycle to ensure that the UMCR is a separate line item and has a minimum of $12 million allocated to it, as opposed to being funded by separate funds. Ultimately, when someone is calling emergency services, they're doing so to protect someone, or in some cases, save someone's life. Therefore, we should strive to send the most capable individuals to meet whatever need is required. Therefore, I see the UMCR as an opportunity to, in mental health crises, send mental health professionals who are trained to de-escalate and resolve these issues, to free up the police department to focus on criminal activity, and simultaneously reduce the risk of injury or even death due to a lack of experience or training. Therefore, in this upcoming budget cycle, I hope that the UMCR receives this funding as a separate line item. Thank you.
Thank you.
As the speaker is coming up, I'll call some more names. Godfrey Plata, Jason Enright, Jillian Burgos, John Rawlings, Matt Simon.
Buenos dias todos. Mi nombre es Garza. I live in Boyle Heights in Isabel's District 14, and I'm here to speak on item number 2. I'm here to support LA Forward's advocacy around unarmed crisis response model. I would like to share my story. I am proof that the concept actually works. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed bipolar 2 with psychotic features, and the way I found out was I actually had a manic psychotic episode in public, and I actually experienced the difference between an armed response and an unarmed response. I'm a big dude, I'm a big Latino, I'm a lineman, I weigh 250 pounds, and I could squat 450, okay? So you can imagine me, myself, being experienced seeing guns in that state, in a psychotic state. I do not know what reality I was in, versus having an unarmed response that had the training. When someone is in a psychosis, you actually need to train them and play into their delusions in order to walk them off the ledge and get them to the safety they need. So I am literally the living proof of concept that this unarmed model works, and I'm here to advocate for its continued funding. So thank you very much.
Great. Next speaker.
Gracias. Thank you.
Hi, council members. Bart Reed, Executive Director of the Transit Coalition. I'm speaking on item number 2, the unarmed police response. One of the observations I see is that we don't use LAPD very effectively. Recently, there was a response at my complex, 9 officers there. I couldn't get my car in to park because they were all blocking the parking lot. In another city, whether it's Burbank or Glendale, there'd be 2 officers. It's wasteful the way LAPD operates. Here we have this program, the unarmed, the program that we're talking about. It will actually save money. As Chair Blumenthal pointed out, it saves the city a lot of money. I'd actually like the council to put this as a line item, substituting out $12 to $20 million out of the LAPD budget because you're going to save $40 million in unneeded expenses. So I strongly support this motion, and please move it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, all. Godfrey Plata, pronouns are he and him, Deputy Director at LA Forward Institute, speaking on item 2. Since 2023, LA Forward Institute has organized around unarmed crisis response because our community members, many of whom are here joining us today, and across the city, have wondered who to call for emergencies where they don't want or need armed response to address a particular crisis. We have been ecstatic to see the city invest in UMCR, the unarmed model of crisis response pilot. Thank you, Councilmember Blumenfield, for starting the office. UMCR is an example of changing systems, and by diverting 6 types of 911 calls from PD to other expert and trained services, we move past Band-Aids and change systems. And so we're here particularly to uplift the need to continue its funding through the 25-26 budget cycle at a minimum of $12 million. If you remember, UMCR was funded this year through rolled over funds and unappropriated budget, but those funds are now out and nothing will roll over. We fear that delegating UMCR to unappropriated funds will put it in danger to compete with other services and needs its own funding and a dedicated line item to make sure we don't have to find the funding in this budget crisis. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Matt Simon, Mid-City West, District 5. I'm here to speak on item 2. I want to support LA Forward Institute's advocacy around the Unarmed Model of Crisis Response pilot. We need to continue its funding through the 25-26 budget cycle at a minimum of $12 million. This model serves as an important step toward a 24/7 comprehensive citywide unarmed crisis response program. UMCR is a successful launched program, one that saves lives and saves money. If we eliminate its funding now, all the time, effort, and movement building that enabled its creation will have been wasted. We should expand it, not threaten its existence. Let's ensure the city's 25-26 budget includes at least $12 million to extend current UMCR services through next year via a separate line item in the budget rather than through unappropriated funds. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Jason Enright, CD2 North Hollywood, speaking on item 2. First, I just want to take a second to thank the council members. Mr. Bloomfield, you've been fighting for this for years. Mr. Hernandez, you've been doing so as well. And really, your staffs have been meeting with us. They've been very transparent in sharing what's going on. The CAO's office and Deputy Mayor Karen Lane's office have been very helpful in helping us fight for this and see this program to fruition. It's very sad that it could be facing a budget cut. We talk about budget, we talk about what the city spends money on. In the last year, you've approved $14 million in liability payouts for people who were killed by the police that were experiencing mental health crises. This program only costs $12 million a year. So you could save money and save lives with this program. I am the father of a son who deals with autism, and I worry every day that he could be killed in an incident like this. So please fund this program and let's save lives together. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
As the next speaker's up, I'll call the rest of the names: Nolan Sutherland, Paxeli Marquez, and Tather Adnan.
Hi, my name is John Rawlings. I live in Tarzana in CD3. I'm here to speak on item number 2. I'm here also to support LA Forward Institute's advocacy for the UMCR pilot, in particular asking that you continue its funding through the upcoming budget cycle at a minimum of $12 million. We truly see UMCR as part of the city's long-term commitment to establish a 24/7 comprehensive citywide unarmed crisis response program. Other than saving lives, it also saves our city money and capacity. These calls are going to go to 911 no matter what, but if UMCR is not responding, then we know that LAPD or fire or other departments need to respond to these mental health emergencies, most of which they're not properly trained to handle. And it costs more money for our city when they do deal with these issues. We all know that the police and fire departments are stretched thin as it is, so let's alleviate some of their burden and let them focus on the types of calls that they're best trained to resolve. Let's ensure the city's upcoming budget includes at least $12 million to extend the current UMCR services through next year via a separate line item in the budget rather than through unappropriated funds as has been done in the past. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Jillian Burgos, and I'm on the NoHo Neighborhood Council, and I live in Council District 2, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. I'd like to speak on line item number 2. I'm here to support LA Forward Institute's advocacy around the unarmed model of crisis response, or the UMCR pilot. In particular, as a neighborhood council member in this new year, I have seen an uptick of emails coming to me from constituents who are saying they have no idea how to reach out for mental health crises calls, and they're feeling that the city has deserted them. They are afraid to call 911, especially because we see the outcomes when LAPD answers these calls. So we need an alternative. We need an alternative model of dealing with mental health crises, especially since we don't have a city department of mental health. This is all we have, and it's only serving 28% of our city. We need equal services in our entire city, and we need to make sure that we meet people where they're at with a mental health therapist, somebody who's specialized to deal with these issues and take it off of LAPD's plate. They've asked for it to be taken away from them. So let's help them out by having Unarmed Crisis Response answer these calls. And thank you so much for all the advocacy that you are doing. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Nolan Sutherland, pronouns he, him. I'm a member of DSA, and I'm here to speak on item 2. This issue is personal to me because my daughter, Gracie, is autistic. There's a substantial overlap between the signs of autism spectrum disorder and behaviors that police are trained to view as suspicious, like avoiding eye contact, pacing, or repeating words. I have feared for my daughter and for her peers in a crisis if they encountered somebody armed that did not understand their needs. UMCR has people specifically trained to resolve mental health issues. And so on behalf of my daughter, her friends, and all neurodivergent people, please ensure the city's budget includes at least the $12 million to extend UMCR services through next year. And please use a separate line item in the budget rather than through unappropriated funds. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi everyone, my name is Tithir. I am a member of the Downtown Neighborhood Council and a proud LA County employee. I'm also here to speak on item number 2 and support LA Forward's advocacy on UMCR. We've heard a lot about why it's the right fit for the needs of our community, but I do want to give some color to the number that we've been mentioning, the 12 million. The amount we're asking for, 12 million, matches what UMCR cost us this year, and it's less than 0.1% of the city's budget. I understand that the city's budget is very tight this year, but this program will be saving costs, but it's less than the 2 city liability cases involving police harm that cost us as taxpayers $14 million. Save money because it's replacing calls that are placed to 911 and 911 service. Thank you. It's providing more care and it's cheaper.
Thank you. Take us home.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paxelli Marquez. My family are residents of CD9, and I'm here to speak on item 2. I'm here on behalf of LA Forward Institute as well to support the existence of UMCR. So UMCR saves money in addition to saving lives. The calls that UMCR responds to are being placed to 911 regardless of whether UMCR exists or not. That means that if UMCR doesn't respond to them, some other city or county service is responding. These services are often more expensive than a response from UMCR team. So not only is UMCR providing more appropriate care, it is also cheaper. 911 calls are most certainly going to increase in the next 3 years given LA's commitment to hosting major international sporting events such as the World. To resolve the influx of non-violent 911 calls LAPD will receive, the city's capacity will be severely limited to address emergency calls that it will receive before, during, and after the games. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that concludes public comment today. We had a lot of good speakers. I'm going to now turn this over to the co-chair to lead us through the first item.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Councilmember. Madam Clerk, would you please read the agenda item into the record?
Certainly. This is a discussion
Mr.
item.
Clerk, thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's a discussion item.
I'm gonna, before I pass it off to Ms. Paris,
And as the council member said, I have the riveting job of talking about a conceptual framework today in the afternoon, so please stick with me. I'll try to move through it relatively quickly. Happy to answer questions. So like I said, my name is Michelle Paris. I am the director of VERA California. The VERA Institute of Justice is a national nonprofit focused on ending mass incarceration and securing investments in community-based systems of care that build safe, healthy, thriving communities. We are often working with government and community. We are known for using data, research, policy analyses, and bringing best practices from around the country to local conversations. We have an office here in LA on 6th and Spring. We're in the MALDEF building. And since 2019, we've been playing a big role in working with LA County in particular, not as much the city, around alternatives to incarceration and in particular staffing some of the alternatives to incarceration work group that I'm going to talk about today. That process involved over 1,300 people, including 47 government departments and programs, 106 community organizations and institutions, as well as individual community members, academics, people from philanthropy. And I'm going to get into it a little bit because the sequential intercept model was used there. And I can show you how that framework can apply to the work that you all are doing through the city and where the overlap is. So just an introduction to what the sequential intercept model is and who uses it. So it was developed in the 2000s by researchers to essentially improve local responses to people with mental health conditions and substance use disorder. So you'll see here some definitions, that it's a conceptual model to inform community-based responses, and it's essentially a strategic planning tool. So it came about because many jail systems, just like the LA jail system, are filled with people who are experiencing homelessness, poverty, unmet behavioral health needs, and part of reducing reliance on jail, which is essentially the default across the country, is disrupting that revolving door. And I think that's what you all are trying to do in part through Unarmed crisis response. It was first developed, and I'll show you the visuals, as a linear model, but people have adapted it as their needs have sort of changed. So they've changed intercepts, which I'll show you, and expanded the populations that it's applying to. So the fundamental question that the sequential intercept model starts to help you answer is, how do people move from the community into the criminal legal system and its different parts, and then back into the community? And as we know, most people who are arrested and incarcerated are coming back to our communities. And there is this revolving door that many of us are seeking to disrupt. And so this is trying to give us a framework for doing that. So essentially, some of the sort of fundamental questions are, how do people move through the system, and what are the common points? And they're called intercepts in this model. What are the gaps, resources, and opportunities at each intercept? And then what are the priorities for action that improve system and service level responses? So the different intercepts, and we'll go through them, are essentially community services, contact with law enforcement, initial detention and court hearings, once somebody's in the jails and courts, reentry, and community supervision. So you take each of those components and start to dig in. What are the system changes that we need? What are the resources and gaps that we have? So the culmination is essentially a local strategic plan where stakeholders identify the gaps, resources, priorities, and then create a plan. So this is obviously just a few entities that use it. We've seen the federal government use it, but also LA County's Justice Care and Opportunities Department uses it. So I'll be showing a bunch of visuals that they use, and so you can also figure out how does the city fit into this picture of what the county is saying that they're doing. Where do our warm handoffs go? Where does our crisis response go? The other nice thing about the sequential intercept model is that a lot of jurisdictions use it. So the County of San Diego, for example, New York. So if you're actually trying to have a shared language with any other jurisdictions and say, well, how are you digging into unarmed crisis response? What else are you doing at Intercept 0? You can have that conversation because you have a little bit of a shared vocabulary and framework. So LA County, as I mentioned, used this during the Alternatives to Incarceration work group process, and essentially that was at a time where the county was saying, we want to offer care first and use jail as a last resort. And because of the mission of that work group, they essentially sort of adapted the traditional model. And the goal was really to see how we could move all of these interventions upstream to prevent crisis. So not just respond to crisis, but how do we build an infrastructure that actually prevents it? So the traditional intercept model looks like this. So it starts at Intercept 0 when someone is essentially in crisis in the community and there needs to be a response. So that's a lot of what we're talking about today, the unarmed crisis response or alternative crisis response, however you want to term it. Intercept 1 you can see is law enforcement, so that's when there has been contact with police essentially. 2 is when someone is initially detained and they have their first court appearance before a judge. Then 3 is a pretty big one, and that's where there's, you're in jail, you're looking at off-ramps essentially, and I'm gonna go through some of this in a little bit more detail, but I wanna emphasize that while the county, somebody is in county custody, the off-ramps that exist may also exist through city services. And so there is actually, it's important for the city to recognize that there may be overlaps at the intercept that you're also not thinking of quite yet. 4 is reentry. So for example, as soon as someone's released from jail, how do they get to a safe place? That kind of stuff. And Intercept 5 is supervision, essentially. So LA County, like I said, as they were trying to do this upstream, they actually added Intercept 00 to acknowledge that certain systems and investments actually prevent crises and crime. And so there was an emphasis on what are the things that we need in our community to essentially ensure that folks are stable. So for example, if we have more ready access to treatment, particularly in communities that traditionally haven't had access to it, that will ensure that someone doesn't actually escalate to the point that it then is a crisis. So that's what they're essentially using. So I'm going to go into these just a little bit, quite quickly. So Intercept 00, like I said, is to essentially prevent people from going into the system of incarceration. So this is your mental health services, your substance use treatment, physical health services, housing options. Measure J and the Care First community investment is essentially kind of trying to get at that, which is how do we move all these interventions upstream so we're not a city full of crises. Intercept 0, which is where the alternative crisis response programs typically live. That's about increasing access to emergency behavioral health services, improving the quality of those services, and then diversifying the types of responses. So this can be a whole variety of things, but this is typically the point of focus for Intercept 0. And like I said, the county also treats this as Intercept 0. So if you're trying to engage with them, you can talk about why don't we improve what's happening there. So Intercept 1 is law enforcement contact up to arrest. And some of these visuals that are on the bottom, you'll actually see in the Alternatives to Incarceration work group report where they try to actually create a visual representation of some of what happens at each of these intercepts. So here, the goal is to improve pathways and systems for law enforcement to refer people to pre-arrest and pre-booking diversion programs for people whose contact with the system is often driven by unmet behavioral health needs and poverty. So that looks like your LEAD programs that a lot of people might be familiar with, where you're really trying to create that early off-ramp, because we know that even 24 hours in jail is so destabilizing that it actually makes someone more likely to be arrested again in the future. And so trying to get those off-ramps to happen as early as possible are sort of a best practice. Intercept 2 is initial detention and filing decisions. So the goal here is to essentially figure out how to support pretrial release, so that folks are supported and safe when they're returning back to the community but still fighting a case, for example, and helping them navigate the legal system. So this looks like your return to court support, court date reminders, and it also includes the pre-filing diversion program. And as you can see here, it's available at some of the LAPD station houses. So again, there is overlap with an interaction between the city and county services for people who are already in the system. So please also consider that. Intercept 3 is about improving access to alternatives to incarceration. So this is the jail custody and court process. Once somebody has been charged and they're already in the court process, with particular attention to mental health and substance abuse treatment services and diversion options. So here you have the Justice Care Opportunities Department. They have a rapid diversion program, which was started through the Public Defender's Office, where they're really, again, trying to get folks out as early as possible and identify who has a mental health need that isn't so serious that we need to find them a hospital right now. Who can we get into, for example, outpatient treatment or some type of care that they can be released relatively quickly. Intercept 4 is reentry planning and release. So that's strengthening the continuity of care for people who are being released from jail custody by investing in a system of release planning and care coordination. We all know that if somebody is just simply released from jail with nothing, the chances are they're going to just be out on the streets trying to look for support, for housing, for help, and it decreases the chance that they're going to be stable, and what we want are safe, stable communities. So this is also about expanding the network of reentry service providers, some of which may be through the city, some of which may be through the county, and developing warm landing sites. So here you can see JCOD, Justice Care Opportunities Department, is talking about a safe landing place. So if folks are released and they need a voucher to get to a house, for example, they can go to a place so that they're not just wandering the streets. Intercept 5 is supervision in the community. So this is about transforming supervision and release practices to prioritize care-first methods and connections to supportive services. So a lot of times we see that with supervision, there are simply check-ins, but actually not always connections to the types of things that actually will help people, like getting a job or getting into treatment. And those are the things that ultimately will make somebody successful back in the community. And so this is about trying to ensure that if somebody is under supervision, they are able to be connected to the care and resources and support that will actually stabilize them. And so this is just another visual representation of the sequential intercept model. And there's an emphasis on how each intercept is really an opportunity to disrupt the cycle of incarceration. You can see at each intercept some of the resources and programs that they're listing. And I just wanted to also leave you with a sort of set of systematic questions that we asked ourselves during the Alternatives to Incarceration work group process, that if you all are actually applying the sequential intercept model to everything that you're building in the city, it might make sense to have a standardized set of questions. So the baseline for every intercept is, what is the problem and scope of the problem? So say, for example, we don't know if diversion is going well. We don't know who has access to it, whether it's costing us, whether people are accessing the services equitably, and we just don't have the data, right? So that's the problem, and the scope is pretty large because you have X programs. So the recommendation there, what is the concrete recommendation, would be about expanding and coordinating data collection from relevant entities to retrieve the data necessary for services, program, et cetera, and aligning these potentially with the county systems to ensure that they're talking to each other. These are the same humans that are going in both databases, and we're being super inefficient because nobody's talking to each other. We don't know who are the high needs, high service users that we can maybe direct some attention to. And then what are the key actions? So you could say, for example, year one, we need to assess the current state of data tracking, talk to the county and see where our data systems misalign and identify gaps that we need in our own data collection processes. The implementation steps I really emphasize because we tried to get to them during the ATI work group process, but I think they're going to provide you also with some really helpful structure, which is which agencies are responsible and who are the key partners. So for example, it could be LA County CIO, but probation, Department of Mental Health, Department of Health Services, all of their data programs we need to understand. So knowing that those are some of the partners is important to just put down who's the lead and who's going to be involved. The funding, staffing, and facilities needed. So and then legislative and policy changes needed. So that could look like what legal barriers are there to actually sharing data, and how do we actually overcome those things? We need an analysis of that. An equity analysis, so any expected disproportionate impact on certain communities and how to address those. So we talked a lot about this during the Alternatives to Incarceration work group process. I'm sure that's part of the unarmed crisis response stuff because a lot of communities traditionally haven't had the resources to respond to crisis and to prevent crisis. And so there's an importance of trying to correct those inequities. And then setting out some metrics and targets, and then thinking through some of the potential impact and unintended consequences of implementation. So you can look at each intercept and each problem and each recommendation through this framework and really try to standardize what information do we need to provide to departments, to the council, to the community. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Paris. Colleagues, any questions? Go ahead, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Ms. Ferris. So one of the things you mentioned about us coordinating better with the county. County has a health department. What are the obstacles to them actually dispatching the calls? I mean, we are part of the county. The city of Los Angeles is part of the county. So they have the infrastructure sort of set up to help us with this. Isn't there a better way to do this?
Yeah, and while we worked with the county on the Alternatives to Incarceration worker process, I don't work for the county, so I can't actually speak to why they're not coordinating maybe better with you, but I think it actually is critical. And the council member and I were just talking earlier about, the way into these crisis response. There needs to be a coordination, right? There should be like no wrong door for somebody in the community to access this, and there should be that kind of shared communication. So I don't know the ins and outs of why it isn't happening, but I think it should be, and I don't know the status of like why they aren't coordinating with you, because my impression was actually that they were. So.
Yeah, because I think that even though we often, well, not often, I think we know at the city level, while we are approximately 38% of the county, I doubt we get 38% of our share when it comes to mental health and health services.
Yeah, and
I think we'd be even willing to put money forth, the money that we are spending today, just to better coordinate things to make it work better. I mean, that's all of our objectives, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the speakers was speaking to some of what you all are investing in helps alleviate some of the burden on what the county is doing, which can help offset, the need for, they can provide money for other additional services. And so there's a reason that they too should want to coordinate with you to make things more efficient and to make things more cost efficient for the county too.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Go ahead, Councilmember Bloomfield.
Great, thank you. No, and I appreciate the question about the county. I think it's really important because, we can't, in the homeless space, for example, we can't get data, individual data from LAHSA or the county because of HIPAA. And so a big question is how do we, if we're taking some of this on, how do we overcome that issue, the HIPAA issue? We can't even get data from the county on what happens to people who are experiencing homelessness in our interim sites and on the streets. When they need higher levels of care, and if they get accepted into a county bed, they won't tell us. So this is one of the coordination issues we really have to figure out. I don't know if you have any thoughts about either how we get the data or how we do more of a warm handoff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking of this from an advocacy perspective. In many ways, that's how I'm sort of coming to the work. And I think the county needs to hear from people that this type of information would be helpful. So a lot of times there have been many community members who said, how do we figure out what beds are available? And I think surfacing that constantly to the board is one way to have their attention on it. And we've had some success in working with the board in passing motions that utilize the info hub information from the CIO's office, but doesn't invoke the HIPAA issues, right? But I think that's going to be hard because you actually need it more on that individual level, as opposed to what we could be asking for, which is like what aggregate summaries we could get that are anonymized, et cetera. So I do think that's an ongoing challenge. And I'll say, I think there are people in the county who want the county's own data and are having trouble accessing it because of all those legal barriers. So.
Yeah, no, and we appreciate that. And it's really going to take not just, because we've advocated, I yell and scream about this all the time, and we do here in the city, but we need the outside nonprofit world to also step up in that regard and talk about the data being able to be shared with city government officials who are trying to do these kind of programs. So do you know, has anyone ever taken inventory of the crisis care resources that are available to the city that are offered by the county? Maybe that's something the city could, this committee might be able to do, but I can't even get an accurate sense of where those beds are or what those resources are.
Ms. Harris, I can answer that question. Colleagues, sorry I'm not sitting down. These chairs are incredibly uncomfortable. But what I want to say is that in this committee, we're going to bring in the county. We're going to bring in the alternative crisis response group that they have working. We'll bring DMH. We're going to learn about all the different programs that this county has, and we're going to see how ours fits into that landscape. And so I don't know when that's happened before, but we will bring those departments and agencies and organizations to come and present directly to us.
No, absolutely. I'm with you 100%. That's a big part of what we can do and what we will do. I'm just sort of highlighting it here, and we'll highlight it probably at every time we talk about this, because I think we need to keep that drumbeat going in order to get that collaboration to really happen the way that can be most productive for the people.
Yes.
Another question, just as sort of a theoretical question, but the care courts that the governor is talking about or has talked about, where do they fit in the intercept model?
So I think they would likely be in intercept. As far as I know, the jail and courts intercept. So somebody has generally already had law enforcement contact. Go ahead.
No, say number 3, intercept 3.
Yeah, I mean, I can see arguments for like.
I think there's, I think in two, there's some like links into the conservatorship system. So I'm gonna guess it's like a 2-3 type situation. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Councilmember Price.
First of all, thank you, Councilmembers Boothfield and Hernandez, for bringing focus on this topic. I know something you both are very passionate about, so I really appreciate it. And Ms. Pierce, appreciate the presentation. I'm curious, how are we measuring success? Is it just the number of bodies that we are keeping out of prisons, or folks that have been returning calls? How are we measuring success in this program?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for unarmed crisis response, it's going to look different than a diversion program, et cetera. I mean, I think there's a number of metrics that you'll want, like the number of people, I think you've already said some of the stats, right? The number of people who would have otherwise had law enforcement then be called, if you're able to decrease that. And using that, you're able to decrease the costs, right? And calculate how much has this saved us by not having multiple agencies, including law enforcement, be involved in the equation. So I think that's important. Some of the softer things are what happens with those calls. Are they connected to services? How many people are actually connected to services? How many people call back again in short order? In the past, I've worked with folks who they did the unarmed crisis response, that de-escalated things escalated again, and then they called police. So, you could also see, was that a successful de-escalation that actually landed the person with services, or fully meant there wasn't a call in short order? Those are some of the ones off the top of my head. But I could think about it and probably provide you all with a more thoughtful response. We do have actually a national program that focuses on alternative crisis response and that is working with sites across the country. So I'm sure they would actually have a great set of metrics to provide you all with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any more questions? Great. Thank you, Ms. Paris, for coming down and for that presentation to kind of set up the landscape for us and where we as a city can plug in. Now I'd like to welcome, oh wait, before that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Councilmember Bloomfield.
Okay, thanks. So we'll move to item 2. If we could ask the clerk to read the agenda item into the record.
This is a discussion item only. CAO, report on the Office of Unarmed Response and outcomes and status of the Unarmed Model of Crisis Response Program.
Great, thank you. We'll welcome the CAO and office to come up, walk us through how our program works, how it interacts with the county. This is exciting. We've talked about earlier. I mean, I remember 5-6 years ago bringing in the folks from Eugene, Oregon, where they're able to divert 17% of their 911 calls, saving them money and et cetera. And we've actually now, in our own model, we have more people than and unarmed responses than Eugene, Oregon, and then the STAR program. We're so big proportionally, it's not nearly comparative, but it is in absolute people. So it's exciting. If you could just get us started. Well, actually, before you get started, Councilman Miranda's, any opening remarks?
Yes, just very excited for you all to share your information. We know that there's different pilots that exist and programs. The county has their alternative crisis response work that they're doing. And yes, they have the public health system and have huge responsibility to serve us. Yet that hasn't happened decade after decade, and we see that we're losing lives because of it. We're getting sued because of it and having to pay out incredible liability costs. And so I just want to believe that this program is like buying shoes that are your size, right? You're not getting forced a pair of shoes. These shoes, literally, we handmade it, and they fit our feet perfectly. And so I'm just excited for y'all to share. I'm really excited about the work y'all have been doing and excited for my colleagues to hear. Pass it back to you. Thank you.
Great. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. We'll try to weave the shoe analogy into our discussion today. My name is Malika Billups. I'm from the Office of the CAO. I'll have the team introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into our presentation, and then we're happy to take any questions.
Hi, I'm Andre Herndon. I'm chief of the unit that oversees the UMCR.
Vanessa Willis, I'm the program manager for UMCR. So I'll just go right into the presentation. We want to share a brief overview of the UMCR pilot program to date. We'll detail the program's outcomes as we just passed 1 year of operations, and we'll take a glimpse at the impact of the program and also look at the future of UMCR. A lot of what you'll see here is a high-level preview of what will be forthcoming in a council report.
Ms. Willis, if you could please speak louder to the mic.
Absolutely. I'm sorry about that. How's that?
That's
okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll just start with an overview. Unarmed crisis response programs aim to provide community-centered, non-police interventions for individuals that are experiencing a mental health crisis or a substance abuse issue or other nonviolent emergencies. Assessing the effectiveness of these programs requires evaluating how well they meet their core objectives. The 5 guiding principles listed here establish a framework for program decision-making. The first one is to improve social and mental health services for individuals in crisis and marginalized demographics, including persons experiencing homelessness. By taking the appropriate calls for service, sworn officers are freed to concentrate their efforts on enforcement and emergency services, likely improving the efficacy of police officer deployment. Also, an objective is to reduce the use of force in nonviolent crisis situations. And a fourth objective is to meet each and every call with the most effective and appropriate response. And finally, we want to view public safety more holistically, such as looking at why people are concerned with or frustrated with the current system. Are people unhoused or facing food insecurity, or are there barriers to accessing services? Just a quick level set to put the information we're sharing into context. UMCR began 24/7 service in 3 LAPD areas on March 12th of last year. And in October, we expanded to a total of 6 areas. The pilot handles a suite of divertible, non-emergency, non-violent 911 calls that include calls for service related to mental health crises, disturbances, well-being checks, indecent exposure, and crises related to intoxication. Responders from each of the 3 UMCR contractors, which are Exodus Recovery, Penny Lane, and Alcott Center, deploy in teams of 2 to the LAPD service areas that are listed here. Each vendor handles 2 areas, with Exodus overseeing dispatch for the entire operation. The expansion, which doubled UMCR's operational areas, was implemented at no cost to the city by evaluating the capacity of the program and utilizing the existing teams to provide coverage in both the original and expansion areas. Unarmed crisis response programs do benefit significantly from multidisciplinary teams, which bring together professionals with diverse expertise to address complex crisis situations effectively. UMCR team composition varies by provider and typically includes a mental health clinician or peer support specialist, EMTs, and community outreach workers. So program outcomes data has informed all stages of program implementation, from the earliest stages of planning to ongoing monitoring and evaluation after the program launched. We collect and constantly evaluate metrics to get insight into the program's scope, resource needs, and the potential impact on the broader public safety system. Adjustments and improvements are continually being made based on data analysis, feedback, and program evaluation. Here are some key metrics at a glance. A broad overview of the pilot metrics as of March 23rd, 2025. UMCR has responded to a total of 7,191 calls for service that have been diverted by LAPD Communications Division. The average response time is just under 28 minutes, and responders spend an average of 25 minutes and 24 seconds on scene, though there have been incidents where a stay of several hours has been necessary. Our data shows that 60% of clients served have been housed against 40% unhoused. And finally, a number that tells a great story: only 4% of diverted calls have had to be redirected to LAPD. So we definitely like that redirect number for a lot of reasons, but certainly we consider it to be a low number that speaks to the thorough work of the PSRs, the UMCR dispatch staff, and the responder teams. It really shows that they grasp the exclusionary criteria and they have the ability to apply the right interventions on scene. Within that 4%, the most common reason for a redirect is that a client has refused UMCR services, which necessitates a higher level of intervention. After that, the next most frequent situation is a situation that evolved to include violence or the realistic threat of it. So for the next couple slides, you can see a deeper dive into who we're serving, where they are, and what challenges they are facing. The average client age is 42, with men comprising almost 60% of those served. Almost 40% of the clients are Black, and 28% of the clients are Hispanic. Also, half of all UMCR clients are served either at a place of business or a residence. A total of 24% are met either in the street or the sidewalk or some other public space. 21% of clients are reported to be struggling with substance abuse issues, while 28% are dealing with mental health disorders. So UMCR provides a variety of services that require different levels of engagement. These levels build on top of each other. So in 9% of cases, they can be resolved with just foundational interactions where responders initiate interactions and build rapport with, between themselves and the clients. And this helps clients who may initially refuse UMCR but could be in a position at a later date to accept services. So in 56%, most of the cases are resolved through crisis management and social and behavioral support, including providing for their basic needs immediately with the provision of things like food and clothing, de-escalating the intensity of the crisis or conducting a suicide screening, and also crisis counseling. 22% require on-scene support as well as connections to future resources and additional supportive services. And finally, 13% of the cases involve planning for future follow-ups with the client, immediate transport to services, and transfers of care to community service providers. So we're on to program evaluation.
And real quick, before you get started with this
Sure.
one, for the program evaluation colleagues, I think this is super important because when we think about the metrics, when we think about studying the effectiveness, like this program has done a phenomenal job in setting up metrics of success, whether this is working, what are the impacts, and I think this is what you're gonna get into right now, which is really, really critical. Thank you.
So as you can see, we are tracking a lot of metrics and data points. But to develop the robust performance management and evaluation plan, we determined 5 key performance indicators for the UMCR program and our service providers. We are working with the Harvard Government Performance Lab to identify national benchmarks and goals. So our first KPI is call volume. Harvard has found that nationally, alternative crisis response programs respond to about 5 calls per day, per unit. After expansion, UMCR is now at 7 calls per day per unit. We saw a total of over 30 calls per day in February, and in March, the highest single daily call volume was 65 cases. Second KPI is response time. The average across other alternative response programs is about 18 minutes. So UMCR right now is about 28 minutes, but we're analyzing the factors that lead to the various variations in response time. LA, of course, by far is a much larger and more dispersed city than what the other jurisdictions who are doing this work are. So at this scale, you can expect traffic hours are a large driver for response times. And thirdly, another KPI is call outcomes. We are, again, working with Harvard to better understand the landscape, to set a benchmark. Like, for example, we want to know how often crisis response units are come across gone on arrival cases. And we are also looking at how effective UMCR is at follow-ups and connections and referrals to supportive services. UMCR has made close to 700 follow-up calls. So we're currently analyzing those calls and determining an appropriate benchmark for that. Lastly, we are looking at the cost per call, and I'll go over that analysis in just a few slides. Or now. We are looking at whether UMCR generates real dollar savings. What we found so far is that even though UMCR and LAPD send out two-person units, UMCR teams are 2/5 the cost of an LAPD response unit. In other words, resolving a call with UMCR now costs the city an average of about $35. Assuming LAPD spends as much time on the call as UMCR does, responding to those calls with LAPD would cost the city about $85 per call. So from here, just a quick look ahead for UMCR for the next little while beyond the day-to-day oversight and operations of the pilot. One way that we are trying to increase our call volume is by adding new call types. We are working together with both the mayor's office and LAPD to prepare an update to the divisional order, which we hope will accomplish two things. One is to expand the number of call types that can be diverted to unarmed response, including mental health crises, noise complaints, and syringe disposals. And two, to align the call types with Circle to make the diversion process faster and easier to navigate for the 911 PSRs. One of the more potentially impactful things that we are putting in place for the future is growing the Alternative Response Partners Monthly Work Group. We recently added LAFD to the group, and it also contains both internal city partners and county stakeholders. So this LAFD edition grew out of kind of a getting to know you session that our team had with the fire department's dispatch leadership. And during that discussion, we learned that they respond to a potentially sizable number of calls that they believe might be better served by unarmed response teams. In a lot of cases, they are what amount to well-being checks or calls related to substance abuse and mental illness that don't necessarily require an EMT response. Our immediate goal is working with LAFD and to analyze a sample of these calls and assess whether protocols can be created to better divert these calls when they are initially triaged. LAFD have been excellent partners, sharing data, notes, and recordings that are currently being looked at by our policy team to determine what could and perhaps should be diverted. I would like to play an excerpt of a call LAFD believes could be diverted to UMCR.
Exciting, we're doing multimedia here, very impressive.
Hi, I just was driving down La Cienega Boulevard.
Sorry about that. I was looking to turn the volume down a little bit. ITA?
It's perfect.
Hi, I just was driving down La Cienega Boulevard at the intersection of La Cienega and Oakwood Avenue, and there's a guy laying on the ground. I'm not 100% positive if he's sleeping or he needs help. I just wanted to let someone know.
Are you able to check him and ask him if he needs help?
Yeah, I was just driving by. I mean, I guess I can circle back, but I was just stuck in traffic.
Okay. If it's convenient, if you're able to ask them. If not, then we could send someone out to check it out.
Yeah, that would be great if you could send someone.
Okay, what's he in front of? Like a store, a sign, a bus bench?
He was in front of a store. I didn't catch exactly which store it was. It was just like all very quick.
Okay, was he on a sidewalk, on the grass, on the street?
Yeah, he was on the sidewalk right in front of the building.
Do you remember, was it the east side or west side?
I am sorry. I believe it was the. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. How about what color clothes? Black, white, Hispanic. Approximately how old?
I mean, he's probably in his 30s, 40s. He's either white or Hispanic. Wearing a gray hoodie. He's laying like with his like in a fetal position with his arms above his head.
Okay. All right, thank you. We'll go check it out.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, bye.
So, we're trying to better assess the program's strengths and weaknesses. We're trying to identify areas for improvement and inform future decision-making. We are planning to begin conducting a deeper dive assessment of the pilot in the weeks following its one-year anniversary. Our technical assistance partnership with the Harvard GPL ends in June, so we are using our last few months with them on creating a framework for that assessment. Just some of the things we want to take a look at are what universe of calls exists for unarmed crisis response, whether the right calls are being diverted, and whether those diversions are resulting in the right outcomes for clients, the cost effectiveness of the program, the average response and resolution time as compared to traditional emergency response. So overall, we're looking at the program evaluation in two main ways. We want to look if if unarmed response is helping to create a more efficient system. That is, has the existence of UMCR freed up LAPD's time to respond to actual crimes or emergencies? The third way we're looking at program reevaluation is whether UMCR is more effective at responding to non-emergency calls. For instance, is UMCR able to get people connected to the services in a way that reduces repeated calls for the same issue? Or does UMCR help decrease arrests or long-term criminal justice involvement? Harvard GPL is working with us to answer this question, so we are working on the best data sharing mechanism with them. So we are constantly gathering feedback about the program's impact and the operations from our partners and clients. We collect impressions and success stories from the field. We provide a phone line to clients to provide feedback directly to us. And we meet regularly with all of our partners to discuss their challenges, course correct when needed, and make plans for growth. One of our most important partners is LAPD Communications Division, who we rely on 100% for call diversion and volume. We recognize that unarmed response makes their jobs more complex, so understanding their perspective on the pilot and the impact of their on their workload is important to us, which was one of the reasons we regularly attend roll calls to provide training, share information, and answer questions. In September, we began a survey of the PSRs to seek their insights on topics such as the effectiveness of the training, the utility of training resources like the decision tree and the informational video, and the overall perceived impact of unarmed crisis response programs. We received 154 responses from employees representing various levels of PSR 1s, 2s, 3s, and senior PSRs, and various shifts. 69% of the survey respondents believe that the roll call trainings that were conducted by the CAO and the mayor's office were effective in helping them to integrate the new diversion policies. Overall, 83% of respondents to the PSR survey believe that the city's unarmed response programs were effective in handling calls for service. The greatest concern revolved around clarification of the divisional order, particularly regarding the types of calls that can be diverted, along with requests for more detailed examples of scenarios and case studies. This effort is currently underway and includes consideration of the additional call types to determine their appropriateness. This survey comment from a PSR is reflective of the survey results and mirrors what we hear from them when we interact with 911 staff. And we can see that the confidence in the growing call volume, as PSRs become more accustomed to diverting calls. Finally, the most important impact of this work is the difference that unarmed response can make in the life of a client. on the day of their crisis and in the long term. One example that captures both came last June when UMCR was deployed to a well-being check in a parking lot and encountered a 21-year-old who was experiencing suicidal ideation. UMCR responders listened to his trauma. They acknowledged, understood, and encouraged his feelings and emotions, and they assessed him for suicidal means, intent, and plan. After determining that his risk of self-harm was critical, the responders worked to gain his trust and develop a safety plan. After having communicated his story to active and engaged listeners, this client agreed to accept immediate linkage to mental health resources and subsequent follow-ups from the responder team. During his follow-up visits, the client expressed gratitude and asked whether he could share his experience. This is just one story, and here's a small excerpt from a recent conversation with Ricardo, who is one of the responders who helped this client that night.
And everything that happened, you guys were there for me that whole time. Even during that first call, I've told you this several times already, but like I said before, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here today. Like, honestly. And I want you to bear that with you. Remember that. Don't you forget that either.
It's there.
Yeah. If it wasn't for you, I would not be here today. Just how it is. Saved my life that night. I mean that. I'm not even saying that just to say it. You know I had full intention to that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You had your plan, you had your note, you were ready to go, man. But, no. Like, I thought, like, nope, not tonight. This guy has too much potential. There's too much, too young, so much to see, so much to live, so much to explore.
And everything that happened.
Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I'm available to take any questions you may have.
Great, thank you very much. Great presentation. We really appreciate it. Powerful story, and also appreciate the 911 call. It really emphasizes how there's a lot of pieces to this, and getting our PSRs trained up is a big part of that, to make sure they know where, knowing where to send the call is the first step, and a really important step. I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about our relationship with the county. And if you could walk us through how UMCR interacts with the county alternative response teams, how that MOU works, how we do referrals to them, because it does get confusing, and as one of my colleagues alluded to earlier, there's overlap, and we want to make sure that we're adding our value, so walk us through that if you would.
Absolutely. So the LA County Field Intervention Teams are available to our UMCR responders as an additional resource, and this is for clients who are experiencing a severe behavioral health or acute psychiatric episode. The criteria to request a response from the FIT team includes a client who has reported thoughts of self-harm, client who appears to be experiencing audio and visual hallucinations, or has a history of hospitalizations, client who has displayed an inability to take care of themselves, including not eating or sleeping, or they're isolating themselves, or their appearance is unkept, clients who have reported active suicidal thoughts and have plan, intent, and access to means. And the reporting party is concerned about their safety as well as the safety of the client. So once a field team once a UMCR field team has identified the need for a fit team, the MOU allows us to refer this intervention to the county's fit teams. One of the UMCR responders will contact UMCR dispatch, who has a dedicated phone line that offers a priority response from DMH's fit teams, and we will wait on scene to conduct a warm handoff when they arrive.
Does that ever get short-circuited in the sense that if that is evident from the call, from the PSR, can the PSR directly get that county fit team if the person fits exactly the criteria that you're talking about? Is there a way to short-circuit that to get the fit team? Because, what would happen in parts of the county that are not the city of LA, where there is no UMCR?
I am not certain if the PSRs are able to contact the county's fit team directly, but I will certainly find out in short order and get back to you.
Great. So the MOU you're saying is that once our team is on site, if we recognize that they fit the fit team, so to speak, we refer them. But obviously, if they're not in the service area, there is no UMCR team, then those county teams are getting referrals somehow, not through UMCR. So I'd be interested how all that works, because I also know there's a vast difference in response time, right? If you call the fit team directly, it takes like at least half hour or more?
1 to 2 hours.
1 to 2 hours to get them. Does it take 1 to 2 hours when they're referred, when you all get them?
That is the priority, response that we receive. It's about 1 to 2 hour response time.
I got you. So if they're directly referred from someone else, presumably it takes even longer. Like, do you have a shortcut in?
Yes.
So the shortcut is 1 to 2 hours.
Yes, sir.
I'm repeating it just because it's crazy to me, and I'm trying to get it into my head. So the shortcut is 1 to 2 hours when we're on site, meaning our teams, and the long cut is if somehow, however it is, if the PSR directly contacts them.
And the county does count. Their time starts when they receive the call. They're mandated to count the entire time, not just the travel time or once they have assigned a unit. It's from when the call comes in to arrival on the scene.
And then, do they have facilities that they are able to directly refer to?
They do. They use the psychiatric urgent care centers, which there are 9 in the county, and I believe 5 are located either in the city or in close proximity to the city.
Our teams use them too, though, correct?
Yes, we do.
Can we refer directly to them?
Yes, we can.
How does that work?
We transport cases that do not qualify for fit. So what we have done with the collaboration with the county is we kind of separate. I went through what the county's criteria is for a fit team, right? So there are cases where it may not qualify for a fit team. It's not that high acuity, but this individual needs immediate psychiatric treatment. So yes, we are able to transport to a county center, a UCC, and warm hand off that individual to that county facility.
But we can't admit them, right? Someone in the county has to make the assessment, right?
Right. The evaluation and assessment is conducted by the county staff, and we just wait on hand with that individual, kind of walk them through the process and, reassure them that they're going to be okay until the county is able to make that assessment.
Gotcha. I have some additional questions, but I want to keep it rolling, so I'll first, of course, defer to my co-chair, and then we'll go around to the others.
Thank you, Councilmember. Can you tell us how you developed the estimate that demonstrates that UMCR is $35 per response? $35?
Sure. I might need that. I'm going to ask my colleague Kiana to answer that question. She came up with that figure.
Great, thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Kiana Tahiri with the Office of the City Administrative Officer. So the dollar figure that we have is looking at the average cost. So as we mentioned, the UMCR teams have, some of them have clinicians, certified clinicians, some of them do not, so they're at different rates. But we looked at an average cost per hour for each of for those teams, and then multiplied that by the amount of time that we spend on average on scene, which is about 25 minutes. Looking at that's what got us the $35 per response per resolving the call. And then we looked at the rate of the base unit, which is a PO2, I believe, for LAPD teams. And that we looked at the cost of that per hour. Both of these include for fringe benefits. And then we multiplied that also by the time that, UMCR spends on scene.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kiana, for that breakdown. Which is great to hear because we're in an incredible budget deficit. So anything that is a good price, but that in the long run saves us money is important and something to uplift.
And to be clear, just to note, we did work with LAPD on establishing and ensuring that the costs that we calculated are also similar to the costs that they would calculate. So that's
beautiful. Thank you. I love the accuracy. Thank you. And for the coordinating, because I know you have to coordinate with a lot of our departments, and y'all have been doing a phenomenal job on that. I'd like to go to the levels of service page. Can you please talk more about the 22 and 13%? Because I think this is really important to uplift. So not only are these teams responding to calls, but a lot of the service providers that are responsible for this program were also service providers before they got into this unarmed crisis response, which means they deliver care, they deliver services. Some of them have housing and supportive services attached to it. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what those warm handoffs look like, what that coordinated connection and additional care looks like, similar to how we can take them to urgent care centers, right, that are run by the county. That would be great to hear. Thank you.
Absolutely. So when we say that 22% are coordinated to a connection for additional care, that simply means that this individual or this circumstance that the individual is presenting with requires some additional follow-up resources. So there are many resources that are available to our teams, including housing and shelter, the UCC system, the mental health UCCs, and additionally medical care, also social services connections. We also use sobering centers. And, of course, there are many homeless services that we take advantage of. So we coordinate the care to each one of these resources and make sure that they take advantage of it through follow-ups.
Great, thank you. And then that 13% of the warm handoffs, I know that there's it's an ecosystem of service providers, but oftentimes they're warm handing off to themselves, right?
Yeah, so one of our providers, Exodus, has a facility, safe landing facility that turns away no one. So all of our teams actually utilize that facility as a place to take someone who may not have anywhere to go. So they do utilize that facility, but the 13% really could be a warm handoff anywhere. It's immediate transport and immediate care and provision of services. That's what the 13% represents. It could be to any, provider. However, it's that immediate connection that we're trying to distinguish.
Great, thank you so much, which I think is important, right? Because it's one thing to do outreach, it's one thing to respond, but it's another thing to make sure that this person is connected with someone to support with the aftercare.
That's right.
So that they're not falling through the cracks. Wonderful. I have a lot more questions too, but I'll pass it to my colleagues.
Mr. Price.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Very inspiring and hopeful. As a follow-up to a question that my colleague asked about how we interface with the county, of course, we know that there are also some city-based programs, Circle being one, and DART. How do you all interact with those programs?
Oh, absolutely, sir. So Circle and UMCR have been working very closely together since the beginning of the program. We are currently, the effort to expand our call types. We are also one of the additional things that we want to accomplish is to align our call types with Circle more closely so that, the PSRs have an easier time determining, what is divertible and, which calls are appropriate for diversion. The collaboration with Circle has,
For example, do you receive any referrals directly from Circle?
actually, no, we haven't received any referrals from Circle, but I'll give you an example about how the programs can overlap. There was an individual who the UMCR teams encountered, and that person, said that they had services, but they didn't know where from. They didn't have a clue, like, where they were with the status of the service. So the UMCR teams actually took this individual to Salvation Army and were able to look up their case in the system, I guess the homeless services system, and they discovered that this was a Circle recipient, and that Circle had been trying to reach out to them with unsuccessfully. So the UMCR teams transported them to a Circle facility and were able to help them get that connection that they needed to get their services.
And talk a little bit more, you mentioned you began having conversations with the fire department.
Yes, sir.
Potential diversion. Talk a little bit about possibilities for diversion there, and if any other jurisdictions that you know of are utilizing the fire department as well.
That is a good question. I'll go to your second question and circle back to the first one. So through our work with the Harvard Government Performance Lab, we have connections with jurisdictions that are doing this work all across the nation. And there are different models, and several models, some models are running alternative crisis response even, through the fire department. Now, that's just a few jurisdictions that do it like that, but, there are different approaches to this work. And we happen to, be in a position to learn from all of them through our partnership. And the connection to the fire department has really, shown us that there is a universe of calls that exist that are going to them that may be more appropriately diverted to us. And the fire department they estimate that of these, the types of calls that we're talking about here, that 86% of them do not result in a transport in an ambulance. 86% of them essentially are a waste of their time. They don't have any services to offer. They don't have any resources to provide. They're just going out on these calls and with no real outcome for the
What
patient.
percentage, do they have any idea what percentage of calls they make like that?
They told us that they receive about 15 to 20,000 mental health calls a year. So we think that that might be the universe, and with the 86% that they report not having any positive outcome or any significant thing to provide these individuals, we anticipate about 86% of that 20,000.
A big universe.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the one thing that program seems like it's working and taking away time, obviously providing more time for LAPD to do other things. One of the things that, since you work with the program, I think would be extremely helpful is that when the unarmed crisis response is reporting after action, that it be try to be a little bit more robust in the reporting. Some of the things that we've gotten from some of the officers that we work closely with, is that unarmed crisis response gets called, then time passes by, maybe even sometimes the same day. Same incident happens, and then they look at the report and there's nothing there. It would be so helpful if they could kind of understand from the first response what the situation was, what are they walking into, what information that they have. But other than that, I think, just if we could just make sure that those reports have as much information as possible afterwards, and as immediately as possible, because sometimes those second calls come right away.
Thank you, Council Member. We absolutely agree with that. We are working with the teams to ensure that we are, reporting back the outcomes of our calls to LAPD as soon as possible. Of course, the teams have a queue of calls that, they are trying to get through. So we're developing protocols that kind of address that and give them a time frame by which they have to report these outcomes.
Great, thank you. You mentioned earlier, you were talking about the UMCR formalizing spaces where teams can regularly communicate and collaborate, especially with the county, so that we can integrate. I'd love for that to get regular reports about that and see how that unfolds, because I think that's critical space in terms of figuring out our lane and how we best take advantage of that. That's it. So turn over to Councilwoman Hernandez.
Great, thank you so much, Chairman. Is there variation across the city service areas? For example, which service areas have had more success than others, and if so, why?
That is a great question. So, yes, there are variations in our areas of operation. So, for example, our valley locations, they have reported that they don't have as many resources, especially in the night hours. They don't have the availability of beds and places to take people. So their numbers of, like referrals and warm handoffs is lower than what we see in, the other areas. Or, we have found that response time is affected by location. Our teams in the Wilshire and Olympic divisions are reporting way higher response times because of traffic. So there are a lot of factors that are affecting our metrics and our, data, and we're analyzing, ways that we can mitigate these issues.
Great, thank you so much, Chairman. I have no more questions. But may I ask one last thing?
Of course.
Is there anything that you all want to uplift that we haven't asked or emphasized from your presentation that you want us to leave with today? I will say, as y'all are thinking about it, colleagues, if you haven't gone to the Unarmed Crisis Response Dispatching Center, you should go check it out. I did a tour of it. It's great, and it's located at that
Safe Landing.
At Safe Landing, right?
That's right. It's located in the same facility that we talked about that doesn't turn anyone away.
Yeah, where is that located? Where's it located?
That's 114th and Normandy. It's in the county, but it's right. It borders the city. It's like the border of the city and the county. But it's a really wonderful facility. They have beds for single males, single females, couples. They take pets. It's really just a wonderful facility.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. No, I think good advice, and nearby here, just checking out Penny Lane is also great. I enjoyed doing that. So this was a great way as a first meeting of this ad hoc for us to level set a little bit and learn some of the basics from you all, and as we move forward and really try to dissect how we can add value and how we can make our program work better. We'll be having an ongoing dialogue, but I want to thank Councilwoman Hernandez, and, you know, we're doing this great experiment as co-chairs, and I think we're off to a great start.
Yes, thank you so much, Councilmember, and please be ready because we'll be bringing you back. Thank you so much. Thank you. Great work. Keep it up. Thank you.
All right, so without further ado, this meeting is adjourned. Oh, not adjourned.
Do we need to read anything?
Do anything we need to say before we adjourn?
No, we're complete here.
All right, then.
Justice clear.
Then we stand adjourned.
Thank you.